Hey there. In this video we're going to kick off a four-part video series. The first video will be a demonstration here on the computer at the workstation of the software program called Jointcam, in which I'll actually lay out a through dovetail joint. The second video will go downstairs in the shop and we'll set up the cut on the CNC, and we'll cut it on the CNC downstairs. The third video, I thought what I'd like to do is walk around the CNC and demonstrate some of the enhancements that I built into the Gatton CNC when I built it, and then that I later determined I could use and added on. Still one more enhancement that I'd like to get to. If that comes to fruition, then that'll be another video series as well. And then on the fourth video and final video of this series, what I'd like to do is a general comparative analysis between both the Gatton CNC and the prior Shoestring Budget CNC. I think a lot of us started out with that Shoestring Budget CNC. Probably a lot of people are still using it. Some people on the Facebook pages have asked what the difference is, and so I thought it might be interesting, at least to a few, what those differences are and some of the strengths and some of the challenges in each one of those different CNC machines. Both very fine machines, both very attainable in just about anyone's budget, and both just infinitely accurate, amazingly accurate for what they're made out of. So again, but there are some differences, and I think that would be a cool video to do just to show some of the differences between those two machines. So without further ado, I'm going to get started here with the Jointcam software. Follow along, and if it's right for you, then that's fine. If it's not, then there are a number of alternatives out there to cut dovetails on the CNC, and I encourage you to do the research and find that solution which is best for you. Thanks. All right, so here we are at the computer screen. I have a shortcut here to Jointcam. Jointcam is a downloadable program from its website. Right now the cost is, I believe it's $135. If you decide to download the software, you may get it for less, you may get it for more, but right now, today, the cost is $135. I found that to be a reasonable price for what this software does. It's about the same price as a mid-range dovetail jig that you use a hand router with. I think I spent about 4 times more than that on my Lee jig, and I'll be honest with you, I never could get that to work near as well as what the machine can cut these dovetail joints with. So anybody wants a Lee jig, let me know. But anyway, so the program's downloadable, and then you get an email with a code to activate it. So let's go ahead and start the instance of Jointcam. Jointcam pops up here. Let me maximize it. There we go. This is the splash screen for the program itself. You have a number of options across the top. And you can also click on one of these links here across the bottom. You'll see that this link here for mortise and tenons is grayed out. It's not active. I believe that the developer's intent is to someday add a mortise and tenon functionality to this. If they do, it'll be great. It's fine without it for me as far as I'm concerned, but for right now, the mortise and tenons link is there, but it's not active. So when you start the Jointcam for the first time, you'll want to go all the way over to the right, or if you have a smaller screen, it'll be over here on the left hand side as the second row of options. But start with the configuration, because what you want to do is configure this application to your machine. Starting at the top left hand corner, you have an option to either use G-code, or if you have a shop bot, then you'll go with the shop bot checkbox, and then that will activate some other options later down the screen here. But I'm going to use G-code, so I leave G-code clicked. Your next option is to export roughing tool paths only. That's when you export your tool paths for your joint. I like to click that because I like to make sure that I only do the roughing tool path first and that I have a final tool path in a separate file. Your option to do that, if you have a tool changer and you can export both of those together, you'll get a tool change command in between those two tool paths. I don't, so I do a roughing tool path only. File extension, this is the file extension for your G-code. I like to use the same thing that I use in my Vectric software, which is the TXT extension, so I click that. Decimal places, I'm using inches, so I only want 4 decimal choices. If you're using millimeters, you may want 2 or 3, or whatever your option is, but you can have a drop down box here and select whatever you want. I'm using 4 decimal places for my inches. I'm going to use line numbers because I like my G-code to have line numbers in it, and I'm going to go have it iterate through those line numbers with as tens. I'm going to use the inch, the G20 command in my G-code. If you use millimeters, you'll want to check this block here for the millimeters. I didn't know when I read this whether I should use the Mach 3 G91.1 command, so what I did was I went through some G-code that was produced by my Vectric software, and I saw that indeed that Vectric software does generate G-code with the 91.1 command, so I clicked that and everything came out fine downstairs in the shop. So I'd recommend you consider clicking that. You can have material comments with your tools. I don't. Keep things simple. I don't need any comments in my G-code. I can have shop. This is a ShopBot command here. I don't have a ShopBot. I just have a Gatton CNC. So I didn't check this. If you have a ShopBot, read the instructions and check accordingly. I did not want to have any tool commands, so I just went ahead and deleted all this right here. There we go. And don't need that either. I did not use a G43 length offset, no. I kept it pretty simple. The tool change, I'm not using a tool change, so I deleted all this information here. I don't need the M5 or M6 command. I don't need a speed command. I don't need a M3 command. I don't need a tool change. I don't need an M7 or an M8 command because I don't use a MR. I do not use enabling G codes. I don't use the M2 command for ShopBot. I know I wanted an M30 command, a recycle command, so that at the end of the G code, it would recycle to the top of the G code. So yes, I kept that clicked right here. I didn't know whether I needed this percent at the end of my G code. So once again, I referenced back to a G code that was produced in Vectric, and indeed that percent sign was there. So it's like, yeah, leave it there. I did not. I did want to go to a park position, and I wanted my original 0 for my X and Y position, and I don't really have any clamps to bump into, so I had my Z park at 1 inch above the 0, the surface. So when this joint gets done being constructed, my router bit goes back to my X0, Y0, which is you'll see when we set this up where that is. It's at the very beginning of your the board that you're using, and it will stop at 1 inch above the surface of the board. File name in the G code, yes, absolutely. I want to keep that there because I like to know in that G code what I'm doing, and I can reference back to that. Here are some general settings when using the program itself. You can show and hide tool tips. I like to show the tool tips because I'm still new at this and want to know what I'm doing, so I definitely want to show the tool tips. I don't plan on using a rabbited dovetail, so I don't need to disable that, but I'm just going to ignore that right now. I'm going to leave these clearances as is. First rapid height, I'm going to change that just to 1 inch because again, I don't have anything to worry about. The machine width, I'm going to that's the distance between your two jigs, your left and your right joint. What I did was I just used one jig at first, and that's all I'm using right now. When I go back to using those two jigs and cut both the left and right joint, then I'll go ahead and measure that distance more accurately. I'll confirm it with a move on the CNC, and I'll enter that here. But right now I'm just going to say that my machine width is equal to the stock width. This is very important right here. I still use my left and right axis as my y-axis because that's the way I set it up on my Shoestring Budget CNC, and that's the way I'm going to keep it on my Gatton CNC. If you use your left and right axis and call that your x-axis, then that's fine. Go ahead and click that box. But my x-axis is actually slave to my a-axis, the same way it was on my original Shoestring CNC, keeping it the same. So if I use both machines, they're both set up the same way. Anyway, I'm going to use the dovetail joint axis as the y-axis. That's the left and right axis, and I'll go into that more in detail downstairs. This is use the positive end of the machine. I don't. You can use the positive end of the machine if you're using the front of the machine. I use the back of the machine. But again, depends on which way you have your machine set up, which way is positive, which way is negative. You may have to check this, you may not. That's something that's going to be a personal preference. File paths, I actually set up I'm not going into this to demonstrate it, but I do have special file paths because I have my computer set up with 2 drives as well as a home cloud and a network drive. So I have these going to different places, but you can either have it go to the default drive and folder, or you can just specify your own here. I'm going to skip by that for the time being. Here, this is interesting here, this plunge rate. Depending upon the feed rate that you direct for each one of your tools, your plunge rate will plunge at a percentage less than that feed rate. When I started out, and until I really get to know this software real well and how that machine is going to respond, I'm going to fly real low and real slow. So I'm going to keep that at 20% for the feed rate. Now you will go to sleep watching that router plunge into that material, but it's safe. And so until I figure out what I'm doing, I'm going to keep that very, very low and slow. This is a scale feed rate. This is a shopbot command, and I'm not going to click that. And these are shopbot commands. This is an interesting part of the program right here. I want to give you a caution on this. You can exit right now, and when you exit, if you exit, you will not get a warning box that comes up and says, do you want to save your settings? It will just flat out exit. And when it exits, you lose everything that you've changed in this screen. So I'm going to encourage you to click right here where it says save settings. Save those settings, and I save the heck out of those settings before I exit. Then what I'll do is I'll go back into the instance of the software, I'll go back into the configuration, and I'll make sure that everything that I set did actually record properly. And so yes, it did. And so I'm good. So that pretty much goes through the configuration. I know I went through that quickly, but you'll have to read the instructions and see what works for you. It's really pretty straightforward once you do it a couple times. I'm not a fast learner, so it took me about 4 or 5 times, but I got it. And then you have, to go back to your start, you have a number of different options of what type of joints to make. This is very flexible software, and so you can make your half-blind dovetails, either custom-made or equal-spaced. You can do through dovetails, equal-spaced or custom-made. You can do your box joints. You can do rounded box joints. You can do all sorts of different types of joints on this. Again, just to keep it really simple, I'm going to go with just the through dovetails, equal-spaced. And that will give the machine a test to see if my settings are proper and how accurate that machine really is. Now, I've already done this. I've run two iterations of a test, and it is scary accurate. The first iteration, I had the board just a fraction of a degree off. It didn't come out exactly square like I wanted it to, but that's why I have my fixtures right now adjustable. Once I get them adjusted perfectly, I'll make them more permanent, but again, something I'll show you downstairs in the shop. But the second iteration, it came out just unbelievably accurate. Actually, it came out too tight. I have to go back in and fiddle with the settings, and I'll show you how to do that next. So when you're doing a through dovetail, you have again, you have a number of different options to choose from. First thing you want to do is your width of stock. That is not the width is essentially the height of your drawer, so to speak. It's how wide that board is. This is set for 5 inches. I was using a 3.5 inch board. The thickness of the stock was exactly 3/4 of an inch. So I wanted my tails to be exactly the same height, so that they would go all the way through. Whoops. So they would go all the way through the board. So I'm using that for 7.5. The tail width is going to be dictated by the tool that you use, and you'll use 2 different tools to make a through dovetail. You'll use a dovetail tool, and you'll also use a straight bit. I've selected in mine number 11. Actually, this is a different tool set than what I have. I'll have to go back and use my instance. But you set up your own tools here. And when you set up the tool, whatever tool you change, that gives you the diameter automatically when you select that tool. And you'll just hit that select tool right here, and it'll fill in all the blanks right here. And then that sets these up here. But you might want to do a double check real quick to make sure that this number right here equals this number right here. Your width, in this case, we've got it set up the same way, so to be the same, so it'll be the same width as it is for the pin and the tail. This extension number right here, 2/100ths, this is how far you want the tails and the pins to extend beyond the surface of the board. 2/100ths is a really good starting point, just not even a fingernail width, and very easy to sand down. But you don't want to have a 0 right here, because if you do, you could wind up being too short if your cut's a little bit off. So I make mine just 2/100ths of an inch longer, and just sand down what stands proud, which is not very much at all. Pins equals tails. Yeah, I always check that on the equal. I'm going to use a roughing tool. If you don't use a roughing tool when you do your tails, your dovetail bit will cut one cut, and it'll be all the way through on your tails. And I did not want to do that. I wanted to hog out the space as much as I could before I used my dovetail. And I think you've already seen that on one of my videos, but you'll see it on the next one for sure. Then if you use a roughing tool, which I'm going to do, click, then you have some other options available to you. I like to have the roughing allowance, just take all of it out except for 1/100th of an inch. My step over, again, I'm going to go low and slow, so I'm going to go 40%. Actually, I'm going to go less than that. I'm going to go 20% for a step over at the very beginning. And then this allowance depth, that means that when you do your roughing, you'll leave that much material at the bottom for your dovetail to take out. And I did not want to leave 1/4 of an inch for the dovetail to take out, so I just put 1/10 of an inch in there. And then your clearance is what goes the space between your tails and your pins. And if your dovetail joint is too tight, you'll want to add some clearance in there. But when you do your clearance additions to loosen up that joint, allow space for glue and such, you'll want to just use 1/1000th at a time. And right now I've got mine set to 2/1000ths of an inch, and it's still just a little bit too tight in there. But you want to sneak up on that. You'll also have an option here to start with either a pin or a tail on your joint. We'll start with pins first. you'll be able to preview what your joint looks like, and you'll see here on this joint your pins will start first. If you start with a tail first, you can click the box for tail first. You'll see that the preview didn't automatically change. It won't change until you click it again, and then you can see that your joint, and this is the one that I made, will start with tails first. You also may have noticed that your G-code, your right G-code file, was not active until after you calculate and preview your joint. When you calculate and preview your joint, if there's something wrong with it, or that you made a mistake, or you've got the wrong tool, or your tools don't match properly, you'll get a warning of that. But if you change your tool, unless you go back and re-click that preview button, you won't see the difference that new tool makes. So what is a good practice, I think, is to always click that preview button right before you go down and click your G-code file. Once you write your G-code file, it'll go to the file directory that you specified in the configuration page, and it'll save that G-code file there. If you come back in later on and fiddle with the settings, before you cut on your CNC, I strongly encourage you to go back and make sure that you've written the G-code file and overwritten the old file. Otherwise, you can get confused and wind up recutting the joint with the error on it first. So again, just good practices when you're saving your files there. All right, let's go ahead and move on. You'll be able to do your tailboard left or right only, and this will show you a demonstration here of what board you're cutting, whether or not you're going to be doing your pin board left or right only, and that will make a difference as to your placement of your board in your jig, and we'll cover that when we get downstairs in the shop. Last thing you want to do is load your project up, and then that will save your settings. You can also, save project will save your settings. You'll also want to, if you want to have the screen come up with the same general settings on it every time that you've just set, you can save the settings. Otherwise, when you exit, it'll go back to the stock settings. If you have a project that you've already made and you want to load it, you can load that project, and then all those settings will come up. Again, this will make more sense when you see it actually on the CNC machine. And that pretty much covers it for the demonstration of the software. This has been very, very brief. The manual for the software is 50 pages. You don't need to know what's on every page, but you sure need to know where things are at in that manual, because you will reference it frequently, especially when you're first starting. So that pretty much sets up what we've done here. I hope this explains what that Jointcam is capable of doing and how you set it up. And we'll move on to the next video, which will be downstairs in the shop. Okay, thanks for watching.